Well, there's a lot going on in Sacramento as it relates to all kinds of stuff with pregnancy centers. Pregnancy centers have caught the ire of the state legislature, and here to talk with us about it is Jonathan Keller from California Family Council. What's up, Jonathan?
Hey, John. Good to be back on the radio with you as always.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. There are two bills that are kind of at the center of what the state legislature is doing. The legislature hates pro-life pregnancy centers. They think they are sort of uniformly dishonest, that they basically inhibit women's health care in various ways by lying. And that's the big claim that is continually made. They're lying about women's health clinics, that they lie about whether or not they provide abortion services. And so the state has to do various things to combat them. So one of those things they're trying to do is AB 315, which is a bill basically to say that any deceptive advertising on the part of pro-life clinics on the part of anyone who offers, quote, pregnancy-related services can result in someone being fined $1,000 for, fined $1,000 for each instance of deceptive advertising. And then there is AB 710, which is basically a mass media campaign that the state is going to be proposing against pro-life clinics. So why don't you talk a little bit about these two bills, Jonathan? Maybe start with 710, and why that's come about and what's going on with it.
So that is the one that is still in its very early stages. It's made it through the Assembly Health Committee. It is from Assemblywoman Schiavo out of Assembly District 40 down in Southern California. And I think we talked about this briefly last week on the show, just the fact that we had a testimony from Heidi Matzke. She was the director of Alternatives Pregnancy Resource Center in Sacramento. And she showed up there with one of her clients, and they both testified in opposition to this bill. They also had a bunch of people that they had served there, including staff and doctors and nurses there in the audience. And as you might imagine, Assemblywoman Schiavo, I don't know if she wasn't expecting anyone to show up or what, but she basically launched into this full-fledged tirade, polemical attack on pregnancy centers. And basically, they had a whole thing. I won't read you her entire testimony. We posted the entire video, both a kind of a 3-minute mini video on our website, californiafamily.org, and on our Facebook and YouTube pages. And we have the entire video on our YouTube channel as well. But I will just share with you part of her response because her statements were so beyond the pale. We actually issued a press release, John, and it got picked up by the Sacramento Bee. Mm-hmm. Our friends at the Bee, reporter Andrew Scheller. No, Scheller. Sorry. Andrew Scheller.
There you go.
He writes occasionally about abortion stuff. He's sometimes a little bit hostile to us, but I was glad he at least covered this. This is what he wrote just a couple days ago. He said, the conservative California Family Council is demanding an apology from Assemblywoman Schiavo over remarks she made in a recent committee hearing. Schiavo was speaking in defense of her bill, AB 710, which would require the California Department of Public Health to launch an awareness campaign warning about pregnancy or crisis pregnancy centers. Such places, which often have the trappings of a reproductive health clinic, seek to counsel pregnant people away from getting an abortion. Speaking at the Assembly Health Committee last week, Assemblywoman Schiavo said, quote, these clinics use deceptive practices targeted at vulnerable populations to draw them in by claiming they provide abortion services when they have no equipment or capacity to provide abortions. Well, John, as someone who runs a pro-life pregnancy resource clinic,
right.
I don't know, do you feel that you and your nurses use deceptive practices?
No.
And you claim to provide abortion services?
No. In fact, if you look at the abortion information page that Obria Group has, it very explicitly says in big bold words at the bottom, we do not provide or refer for abortion services. So, and this is sort of our fear about this whole thing is centered around what is deceptive going to mean here? And I've done a little bit more work. It seems like they're sort of basing it off of other deceptive advertising statutes that already exist. And it would be sort of a reasonable person standard. Well, the problem is, though, that the sort of individual bounty system that they're sort of putting out. Well, as it relates to 315 anyway.
Right.
But no, I think when you look through the different pregnancy centers around California, the difficulty is there's a wide spectrum of different kinds of places, and they're owned by individually owned and individually operated, most of them. So the idea that you're going to have absolute uniformity is a bit of a stretch, but it seems as though the vast bulk of them indicate somehow that they none of them are saying, yeah, come on here for an abortion, and then they don't do abortions. I think the vast majority of them do not say that they do abortions, and they're, it seems as though the idea that these are all just lying, deceptive clinics, it can be kind of cleared up in one phone call to these clinics, or even I think a lot of these clinics very flatly state, like Obria does on the website, no, we don't do abortions.
And to clarify, John, I don't think that either you nor I, if we were talking to any pregnancy resource center, whether it's Obria or any other one that we work with, if they said, hey, do you think we should lie and say we do abortions to try to trick women to come in? I would say, no, you should not do that. That is bad advertising. That is borderline, I would say, deceptive advertising. If you explicitly advertise for something that you say you do and you don't actually do it, no, I don't think that's right. But this is the thing, John, where I think she went even above and beyond the so-called attack of deceptive advertising. And this is why we issued our press release demanding for an apology. Schiavo, going back to the article from the Bee, Schiavo said that it is, quote, extremely dangerous that these fake pregnancy centers present themselves as medical clinics. To be clear, they are not licensed medical clinics. So, John, I didn't know if you knew that, but despite the fact that you've had to go through
we are licensed.
Years of paperwork. You have doctors on staff. You have all sorts of insurance that you're accepting. You are actually not a medical clinic, John. Sorry.
Right. Well, news to me. Yeah. Well, and some of them are not.
Sure.
But they also don't hold themselves out as medical clinics.
Right.
They'll flatly tell you, we're not a medical clinic.
Yep.
Or
we can offer center.
Yeah, or we can offer some services, parenting classes, or this, or we can give you an over-the-counter pregnancy test.
Yep.
But they're not necessarily holding themselves out as medical clinics. So I mean, she's painting with a really broad brush because like some of them are, in fact, licensed. Obria is a licensed medical clinic. Pregnancy Care Center in Fresno is a licensed medical clinic. These are licensed medical clinics.
And this gets to the point, John, why specifically we thought it was incredibly ironic and even, I would say, borderline defamatory. And I don't know that you could say it's libelous. I mean, I think there's a pretty high free speech standard, obviously, as we know, for any comments that are made on the floor of the legislature. But
and on the floor of the legislature, you can pretty much say whatever you want and get away with it. Yeah, there's a bunch of constitutional stuff protecting that.
Which this was the statement that the Bee picked up that I made in our press release. Quote, it is wholly unacceptable for elected officials to use their office to slander private citizens and organizations. Assemblymember Schiavo should publicly apologize for the lies and defamation directed towards pregnancy resource centers across California. And John, here's the kicker. Specifically, the 2 medically licensed clinics in her district.
Right.
That serve thousands of her constituents in Assembly District 40.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then goes on in this article, the CFC acknowledged that not all pregnancy crisis centers are licensed medical clinics, but said the 2 of them in Schiavo's own district are. Both facilities mention on their websites that they do not provide abortion services or referrals. So the fact that she's authored this legislation, and it seems to be basically entirely carrying the water for, in this case, I think it's the Women's Law Center. I don't think this bill, interestingly, is actually endorsed. AB 315, I think, was sponsored or endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I'm sure that this one is you're going to have people. I know NARAL came out and endorsed this one. They had people from NARAL, the director of NARAL Pro-Choice California, was testifying in support. But it is just shocking to me, John, that there are 2 medical clinics that are licensed that are serving women in her district. It's not like, I live in a district in San Francisco where we don't have any pro-life centers. I've never been to a pro-life center. And John, the other piece de resistance on top of this is that we reached out to these 2 clinics in Assembly District 40. One of these clinics that we spoke with so far has actually sent multiple invites. Before AB 710 was ever introduced, they sent multiple invitations to Assemblymember Schiavo's office and said, hey, we would love to have you come and tour our clinic. We would love to have you come and meet our staff and see the great work that we're doing. It's kind of like, John, I think here in Fresno, we have a couple of great assembly members. Well, I should say, I'll put this delicately. We have one assembly member who we really like, who is great on a pro-life issue, who is Assemblymember Patterson.
Yeah.
This would be like if the other assembly member from here, who is not as pro-life, not pro-life really at all, if Dr. Assemblymember Joaquin Arambula had introduced this bill, and he was basically slandering the pregnancy care center here in town, and he was slandering Obria without ever having bothered to even pick up the phone or log on to a website and find out the actual work that you guys are doing here in his own district to help his constituents.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, and that's the unfortunate thing is I think this is all driven not by anything having to do with people's actual concrete experiences with pregnancy centers. I think it's being driven by Planned Parenthood and NARAL and all these activist organizations who they have a certain party line, that, even in the bill analysis, it's, the bill authors are affirming, like they had testimony from, I believe, a clinic in Sacramento, which this is for AB 315.
Right.
So they had analysis saying that it's the contention of the authors that these kinds of entities lie. And they had a letter from one of these pro-life clinics saying, no, we don't. We explicitly put it on our website that we do not offer abortions. And they said, well, in spite of this one clinic, which should have nothing to fear then, we do believe all these clinics lie. So most of these clinics we believe do lie. So it's kind of it's almost like it doesn't matter how many individual examples you present to them. The narrative is the narrative is the narrative, and they're just going to keep, kind of plugging away with the narrative.
I understand that, but it is just highly offensive and just really ridiculous. If she was able to cite, this is the thing that's amazing, that she had this bogus kind of big broad brush, as you said, where she's claiming, oh, this is what all these centers do. And yet, in her testimony, she never cited an actual center by name. She didn't say, this center on their website, on this page, says this. Or, oh, we have a flyer or a brochure or a Facebook post from this center. And then when she is presented with counter evidence of saying 2 centers in your district are licensed medical clinics, they are the direct contradiction of everything that you say in your testimony. This was her response, John. Assemblywoman Schiavo, she said, quote, I've never been shy about standing up for our community, and if radical anti-choice extremists want to go after me, I'll wear that as a badge of honor. And John, this is one of those things that in no other setting would the left think this was acceptable. It begs the question, what are these crisis pregnancy centers trying to hide that they would be opposed to a simple transparency measure?
Right.
Well, look, if you don't have anything to hide, why don't you let me search your vehicle, says the officer. Oh, if you don't have anything to hide, why don't you let me into your house just to look around and make sure everything's okay?
Right.
I mean, the left, John, used to be defenders of, defenses against unreasonable searches and seizures. They used to defend, in some ways, I think maybe too much, a criminal's rights to protection against prosecution. But in this case, they seem to have completely thrown that out the window, and all of these centers are guilty until proven innocent. And even when we present them with information, it's like, well, it doesn't matter. You're just an anti-choice extremist.
Right. Yeah, and it's, they don't really care in any way, shape, or form about the truth of the matter. All right, when we return, we'll talk a little bit about AB 315 and the threat of lawsuits against pro-life clinics. We'll be back on Right to Life Radio. We're back on Right to Life Radio. We've got Jonathan Keller from California Family Council with us. All right, Jonathan, we've been discussing the 2 kind of really bad bills targeting pro-life pregnancy centers, AB 710 and AB 315. You've been going through AB 710, which is basically going to be a California statewide propaganda campaign talking about how horrible pro-life pregnancy centers are. And we had seen members of the assembly kind of just lying through their teeth about how pro-life pregnancy centers act, operate. Whether they are licensed, many of them are. The clinics are actually licensed. You guys have been very involved in this. It sounds like you had sort of another sort of aspect of it that was kind of important for you guys. Yeah.
Well, so I'll say this. The thing that connects this with AB 315, beyond AB 315 obviously deals a little bit more with direct penalties on pregnancy centers. It basically would create a private right of action. If someone felt aggrieved, if they felt like they were deceived, it would allow them to be sued and potentially huge amounts of fines for so-called deceiving somebody.
Right.
But here's the connection on that, John. I think the bigger problem with both of these bills goes beyond the actual policy. The policy is bad enough, and I think it's really dangerous to have either of these things happen because, number one, AB 710, you're going to propagandize, you're going to spread both lies about pregnancy centers, and you're going to supercharge the advertising efforts of Planned Parenthood. And, John, I don't think any of our listeners think Planned Parenthood needs any more state money to be spent on advertising for Planned Parenthood.
No, I think they do pretty well for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, the state of California has the highest number of abortions in the country. You would kind of expect that given the size of our state, but we also have a very high per capita abortion rate compared to some other states in the country. And that is really bad. I don't think we need to be advertising more for that. But, John, the thing that I was mentioning on these two bills, the slander, beyond just being mean and kind of hurting people's feelings, I think I'm okay to say this publicly to the rest of you. The hearing was on Tuesday, the 25th of April, I believe it was. And the 1 week exactly after the hearing, John, we got a message on Tuesday. It was literally 1 week exactly after the hearing, which also coincidentally happened to be the 1 year anniversary of the Dobbs leak. But Assemblywoman Schiavo got up here in April, said this very aggressive, arguably defamatory thing about pregnancy centers. They're fake clinics.
Yeah.
They're lying to women. They're hurting people. They're obstacles. The director of the Alternatives Pregnancy Center then got up and testified in opposition to that bill. Guess what happened to the Alternatives Pregnancy Center 1 week after they testified? Got this message.
Vandalized?
I arguably think this is maybe worse.
Okay.
From the director. A SWAT team just showed up at Alternatives Pregnancy Center.
Oh, geez.
There was a call that 24 people were shot and killed in the clinic. It's not true, but obviously shaking up all of our staff.
Jeez Louise. So they got swatted
after
this,
And can you explain, John, for people, I know some of our younger listeners know, but for those older folks listening, swatting.
Yeah, so this is like a really nasty thing to do to someone. You make a fake call to police, presumably from some line that
untraceable,
that can't be traced, and you just you tell them that something horrible is happening in a building or a property at a certain location.
Someone's been murdered, someone's been held hostage.
So it's something that would necessitate a SWAT team or a very large,
response,
urgent police response.
Not just a knock on the door, but
to bust in guns a-blazing. So it's a very dangerous thing to do. It's a very disruptive and terrifying thing to do. And it's kind of it's a sort of nasty thing to do. It's like doxing someone, only
on steroids.
Worse in some way. Doxing someone is publicly revealing their address to make them subject to harassment in various ways. So it's a really bad thing.
And so look, John, I realize that we don't like it when the left says, "Oh, well, speech is violence, and your words are inciting violence against these marginalized communities." I understand we don't like that. I understand that people have free agency. People are responsible for their own actions. But if sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander.
Right.
If we as pro-life people get attacked for creating, a dangerous environment, blah, 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 I think that it is entirely appropriate to call out Assemblywoman Schiavo for creating a dangerous and potentially hostile environment.
Right, where activists then feel, entitled to go swat somebody.
I will just say, 7 years ago, when we were at the Capitol, 8 years ago, when we were at the Capitol for the Reproductive Fact Act, AB 775, there were dozens of pregnancy centers that came up and testified in opposition to that bill. I don't remember ever hearing a story of this type of swatting happening to any of those pregnancy resource centers.
Right.
But as soon as I posted that, I shared it with a couple of friends from other national organizations, and one of them said, I've started to hear more and more reports of that. So the USCCB said, I'm hearing more reports of pro-life centers, pro-life organizations getting swatted all around the country.
Right. It's bad stuff. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We will see you all next time on Power Talk.